Now we're going to get your answers to the questions we asked Dominic.
There you go.
He said wonderful things about you.
Oh, that's cool. He's killer music, killer composer. That's great. And what are your names?
I'm Mike.
Mike?
I'm Madeline.
Hello. Mike.
When you're writing your main themes versus your underscore themes, how do you approach? Is it the same process for you? Is it a different process? And how do you go about even starting your main themes?
That's a great question. I mean, in the case of the last few years, in the case of Halo this time and Jessica Jones, the very first thing they wanted me to work on was the main theme for the character. And the graphics for both main titles were a work in progress. It took a long time for them to get exactly what they wanted. But we would have a lot of meetings about, for me, it's about who is the character? Who is it? What are they all about? What makes them tick? It's sort of getting acquainted with the character, and then from there, exploring what the musical approach might pop up. And just to get, for example, with the Master Chief theme, for example, this was a unique situation because Halo already has a pre-existing body of musical work. Right. They wanted a new theme, so you had to be mindful of
with a fan base that will notice if you mess with it too much.
And you really, and there was a lot of discussion about how much to use themed music from the game, and there was some decisions that were made in that regard, but way above my pay grade. But one thing I remember when I talk to people, when they talk about the Master Chief, if you know the game, what are the qualities of this character? This Master Chief is a dedicated soldier, very strong, there's some heroism aspect. So those things are very strong, but there's also there's a humanity in this character, and when we were talking about the Master Chief in terms of this particular storyline, somebody used the word emerging in humanity, and I thought those were really strong words. Sometimes those words just sort of lock me in, and then when I started seeing the early visuals of the main title where he's sort of reaching out, and there's this aspect of reaching to his sort of truth, and so emerging in humanity, those were little breadcrumbs for me. And the hero aspect and the strength aspect were there. So these were just little things. And then I sit at a piano, and I have a little floppy disk that can still record themes. I don't need I sort of go around the block experimenting with things that just sort of pop up. The Jessica Jones theme was about her being in sort of a person that sneaks around at night.
Right.
Be on fire escapes and stuff, and I thought of a cat.
Right.
And so my first little slithering moment was that, and they had a bit of a jazzier noir vernacular. And these are just the things that just start. That's how it goes. And then once you get that theme, what's cool about it is that if people start enjoying the theme and signing off on it, it starts to have a structural integrity with regards to how it services the show. And in Halo, there's themes for Quan, Master Chief, Sangeli. I don't know if I ever pronounced that right. If I did. The Halo itself, the Halo world itself.
Right.
So these things they start forming organically, and then if they start to really click, then the show has the structural strength to kind of play around and do things with. So if you're lucky, you get the theme strong in the early part, and you can go from there.
So you've worked with a lot of directors over your career. Do you prefer ones that are very collaborative throughout the process, or more hands-off and providing feedback towards the end?
I love directors talking to me earlier on, because they almost always, again, say something or give me a point of view. They give me some little bit of light where they're heading. If they're a micromanaging situation, that's not as fun. That has happened, and you can work with that. If it's so specious that they don't have any point of view whatsoever, that can be a little bit unsettling, because you want to have a little bit of falling in love with the director a little bit. Bill Conti said this to me once years ago. I was a pianist for him at a gig in Florida at Disney World, and he said first thing he does is he falls in love with the director. In other words, he wants to fall in love with his vision and kind of grab onto it.
Right.
And I felt that, so whenever I feel that kind of dedication, commitment, then you also feel you have the freedom to kind of explore and experiment, and sometimes you don't always have that environment, but when you feel like you have the protection to be able to spread out and try things, a lot of magic can potentially happen. And think we, I'd like to keep that going.
So you have shows like Halo, and you did Next, which my podcast network covered, and short seasons, just that new version of television. But then you have 24, you have Homeland, these shows that ran for a long time, Bones.
Yeah.
How do you keep that fresh? How do you, in episode 150, still, I'm just copying myself at this point. Is there something you do to psych yourself up to keep it going and keep it fresh?
You're asking really one of the great questions. I will say, when you're working on Halo, it's funny. It took me a year to finish 9 episodes because just the way the show works.
Right.
And because streaming services now, I find, have a lot of episodes open at the same time. So you're working on a lot of. It's almost like a 9. It's like.
They do a lot of block shooting, so they do multiple
and they're
episodes
putting
at
various
once.
shows and so like you're working on show 1, and I used to work very linearly, like on 24, as Kurt said in our talk. You work on one episode, the next episode, and it literally was an hour of the day in real time.
Right.
And you get kind of in a zone with that because you just can't look up. You can't look up, otherwise you'll get kind of burned out and intimidated, and you just got to just stay with the work. But with each season of 24, for example, there was always a new sort of plot and a new sort of storyline of some sort. And there's always a nucleus of sound that embodies a show, whether it's Bones or 24 or Medium or Jessica Jones. And what you hope happens is that it expands outward a bit. It kind of expands outward and becomes something, not foreign to people who know the show, but not so redundant that it just gets tiring. It's kind of like when you redesign a car.
Right.
If it's too wildly updated, people won't feel the connection to the brand. So you got to kind of, it's a tightrope. It's no real clear answer to your question. But I will say, on a shorter season show that are more boutique oriented, it's all but assured that happens. And in particular, Halo, there were storylines that take place across all different parts of the galaxy. So there was a theme for Quan, themes for different worlds and different sounds. So that's probably one of the more exciting parts of Halo.
Right, the variation within the project. Yeah.
So I guess you've had an incredibly impressive career working on these projects. What's the best piece of career advice that you've gotten that you would want to share?
My mentor was the composer of the X-Files, Mark Snow, and he's still a working composer in his 70s after 40 years of doing it. So he's obviously
more iconic music, though. I mean, X-Files and its music.
One of the great friends of my life, and one of the great composers that I've ever had the privilege of working with. He gave me a piece of advice about when people give notes, because we write music and we get criticized. And 2 minutes ago. Sorry, my answer's too long.
No, you're doing great. That's exactly what we want.
He said, when you get notes, sometimes there's a desire to be adversarial. Well, wait a minute. I want it. Of course, I want it to be this. You're not seeing it right. He said, forget all that. He said, imagine yourself like that water creature in the abyss that's sort of transparent, and when the arrows come at you, they just go right through you. I just never forgot that imagery. And what it does is it makes you listen more carefully. You listen more to what they're really saying. Like if they don't like something, you feel the burn, like when someone stings you. But if you really get to the heart of it, they're basically saying, look, this is what you're not working. What is the? I'll return a question saying, well, what is it we want to feel? What is it? What are we not getting? And sometimes the really honest ones will say, I'm not sure. If they don't know, they're honest enough to say, I'm not sure. Sometimes they do know, and they say, I just want to feel the heartbreak of this thing at this moment. So then you have a way forward. So there's a deeper listening that comes with being able to receive criticism, and with each practice of that, there's more resilience as an artist that comes with it. You become less jostled. It'll always happen. We'll always get messed up in the head a little bit. We'll take things personally. We get in an argument,
right?
But we just don't. It doesn't become a scarred on your skin, So that's one of the best pieces of advice I would give. And be patient. And when you're working for somebody, just be humble and listen and learn.
You've worked in all sorts of genres. If you had the choice, is there one in particular you like to write for or to listen to that speaks to you?
I'd love to do a musical.
Musical.
I directed musical theater and college, and I worked on a few musicals on the side. I think it's a deliciously uncharted art form in terms of anything goes. You know, you can look at a show like Rent or Hamilton.
Sure.
Two completely successful shows that follow completely different kinds of formulas. That would be a hoot. That'd be a hoot. That'd be fun.
Well, before she comes and steals you're so many hours of music written over your career. How do you avoid writer's block? And if you hit writer's block, how do you get through writer's block?
Step one: leave the studio. If you have a deadline, you won't want to. You won't want to. It's like if I asked you to say the word sandwich 100 times. When you say sandwich for the 100th time, you just can't even understand it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes we dig so deep for an answer to something, then you're holding too tight. Step away. Go for a walk. It makes no sense, but because in the moment it makes no sense because you're so pressed for time. But you have to engage the world more broadly. And I'm married and I have 3 dogs, and so we've got to sort of spread a bit, take a breath, come back, and 100% of the time you have a fresh look.
Great.
Just don't have a fresh look. Anyway,
Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate the time.
Take care.